All right, let's go ahead and get started here. I'll introduce myself here in a second and also talk about our company, InfoTrust. But today we will be talking about Google Analytics' new properties that are in beta called App Plus Web. And so today I will be diving into a little bit more about these App Plus Web properties, what they can do for you, and what kind of additional questions they solve. But I'll also be making the case for why you should be deploying these new properties side by side with the regular Universal Analytics properties that you're currently using. So let's go ahead and get started here. A couple housekeeping items before I yes, we will be recording this. So every single time we have people email us afterwards, we have people that ask questions throughout the presentation. If you've ever been on an InfoTrust webinar, we will record this. We will send you out a copy of the recording, so don't fret here. I've left some time at the very end for Q&A, so feel free to use the questions panel in the GoToWebinar to actually ask questions. I'll probably get to those at the very end. If I see any pop up that are super relevant to what we're going over at the time, I might be able to stop and go through those. And then at the end of the presentation on the last slide, I have my email address. If you have any additional questions you'd like to ask, feel free to reach out at that point. Yeah, we can talk. So, okay, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Andy Gibson. I am the head of vertical over here at InfoTrust. So some of my credentials here, I've been working with Google Analytics 360 since it was first available. I think it was about 2012, 2013. I consult with some of the largest media brands within the world, and I also am an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati. All right, a little bit about InfoTrust. So we are a analytics consultancy. We also have products we've developed as well, so taginspector.com being one of those. We're headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, but we have offices in Chicago, Barcelona, and Dubai. We help organizations increase their ROI on their digital analytics, and so we have a number of different services that we provide, and you can take a look there on the left-hand side. And then we also have technology partnerships with a number of different platforms and products. So Google Marketing Platform is one of those, which includes GA360. Google Cloud, we have now, which is rather new, I think in the last month, and then Blue Concession Cam are two other platforms that we support as well. All right, so for the conversation today, we have a few things that I'm going to go over. So one, I'm going to talk about the state of Google Analytics measurement. I'm going to introduce the new App Plus Web properties and talk about, what additional reports and stuff like that you get access to. I'll also talk about the types of companies that can benefit from these new Web Plus App properties. I'll make the case for double tagging with Universal Analytics and App Plus Web, and then we'll talk about what's next throughout the next year here. So one thing I do want to caveat with a lot of what we're talking about today, there is not a ton of information out there yet from Google Analytics or Google, the company, on these Web Plus or these App Plus Web properties. And so if you do some research, you'll notice there's a blog post from Google announcing them. There's a couple support documents, and that's about it. So there's a lot of things that we can't mention today, but Google will be making announcements about over the next year probably. But I did just want to caveat that there's not a ton of information out there. So one of those reasons for having this webinar today is just to bring up some of these topics and talk about how you should be handling this in the next year. All right, so let's go through the state of Google Analytics measurement at this point. So a very unofficial history, but there is a lot of confusion when it comes to Google Analytics in the industry at this point because there are so many different versions. So if you ever hear someone talk about the classic version of Google Analytics, that refers to Google Analytics GA.js, which is actually coming out of a product that Google purchased in 2005, which was Urchin Software. And so Google purchased Urchin. Urchin.js was their tracking model essentially. Google went ahead and acquired some other companies to lump into their new product called Google Analytics. And so they've had various versions of Google Analytics since first initially purchasing Urchin and then rolling that out. So in 2011, they announced Google Analytics Premium, which was the enterprise version of Google Analytics. It's since been renamed to Google Analytics 360, and that product falls within the Google Marketing Platform now. Universal Analytics, which is the newest version of Google Analytics at this point, the version that everyone is using currently today, that was announced first in October of 2012. It came out of beta in about April of 2014. And then you can see in terms of app tracking, there's a number of solutions out there. So Google for a long time has had their own Google Analytics for mobile app tracking with native SDKs. Google acquired a company called Firebase back in October of 2014. And so Google rolled that into another mobile app platform for tracking called Firebase Analytics. And so there's been a number of kind of like products out there that Google has had out there for tracking for web and app. In December of 2018, Google actually started deprecating Google Analytics for mobile app SDKs, meaning anyone that's using the current mobile SDKs for iOS or for Android are going to actually lose access to that eventually. It's a little bit different for GA360 customers. It's not quite as cut and dry right now. But with any new mobile app tracking, Google is recommending and pushing you towards Firebase Analytics for that. A new thing that we'll be talking about here today then is App Plus Web Properties. And so back in July, Google announced App Plus Web Properties, which are beta properties that combine app tracking with web tracking. And it uses the actual same event-based data model as Firebase Analytics. So everything is event. There is no differences between page views, screen views, and those things. Everything's an event, and then you can name those events something like page view, screen view, etc. So this is a very high-level, unofficial history of Google Analytics, but I think it makes a little sense to go through this just so we're level set on what we're talking about, because it does get confusing, especially in the last couple of years with mobile app tracking. So the current state here with web tracking, you have analytics.js, which is that newest version of Universal Analytics. You have gtag.js, which is supremely confusing, but essentially it is a combined analytics and ad measurement framework. So it basically combines tracking for Google Analytics, DoubleClick, and AdWords within one tag. But generally, the enterprise level clients that we're using or that we're working with actually use a tag management system already. So there's really not a point to using gtag at that point. But it is a bit confusing there between analytics.js and gtag.js. Just know gtag.js actually loads the Universal Analytics code, which is analytics.js. And HTML, that's also another version of web tracking that you can do. For mobile apps, we mentioned the GA native app SDKs are being sunsetted, so that's for iOS and for Android. Now everything is Firebase Analytics. And then for any other type of internet connected device, you can use the measurement protocol, which essentially allows you to send out HTTP requests to a GA property. So there are a lot of different libraries that can be used for tracking. I highlighted down at the very bottom in red the App Plus Web Properties beta and kind of where that fits in. It actually is going to essentially mesh both of those worlds. So web and mobile apps, they now can be combined into what are called App Plus Web Properties. So the current data models, really with web, it's strictly based on page views and events. So if you've ever heard the term a hit in web analytics jargon, that just means a way of sending data to whatever web analytics tool that is. So within Google Analytics, hits can be page views and events mainly. There are some other types of hits there, but generally it's page views and events. In mobile apps, if you're using the SDKs, the native SDKs, it's screen views and events. With mobile apps in Firebase Analytics, it's strictly events. And then for any other web connected platforms that you're using something like measurement protocol for, you can technically send page views, screen views, and events. So a little bit confusing if you're trying to compare web to a mobile app. They're not using the same data model, especially if you're using analytics.js versus Firebase Analytics. And so it gets very cumbersome if you're trying to compare very similar platforms, but on different operating systems or something like that. So really the culmination of that is this new app plus web property. And so you'll notice I put beta in parentheses as many times as possible. I'll have a caveat slide in here to go over why we're making that so apparent in here, but did want to talk about from a high level what app plus web is. So app plus web, if you see top left-hand corner, that's really the model that we've been talking about so far. There's a couple different ways of tracking. They use different metrics. There's not one easy way to track a web and an app together with the exact same data model. Now, app plus web actually changes that. So everything can be tracked within the same data model, and everything is based off of that Firebase Analytics data model, which is event-based streaming data. So no longer do you have screen views or page views and then also events. Everything is event-based. You can send an event for a page view if you want, but it is still an event on that data model. When you go in, you might have seen this, but when you go into Google Analytics and you try to create a new property at this point, you have three options. You have web, you have apps, and then you also have apps and web, which is this new app plus web property that we're talking about here. Now, when you actually create these app plus web properties, it asks you to create a stream, and those data streams are actually for the different types of platforms that will be sending data. So you can have a data stream for your iOS app, you can have a data stream for your Android app, you can have a data stream for your website. All of those streams of data essentially push in data into that new app plus web property that you created, and then using that same data model, you can effectively compare and contrast those different data streams. So now you're comparing those different platforms together, but within that same data model. One of the really cool things with app plus web properties when it comes to web tracking is that there is this concept of enhanced measurement. So Google Analytics and Google, from a company standpoint, have taken a lot of feedback from a lot of companies and a lot of partners to understand the biggest hindrance to getting quickly set up is a lot of these enhanced types of activities that want to be tracked just can't be tracked very quickly. Google's done a great job of adding a lot of auto event tracking features within Google Tag Manager to allow you to go in and track button clicks and stuff like that without actually having to have your developers add that code. But taking this a step further with app plus web properties, it's really just a button click within Google Analytics. You don't have to go into Google Tag Manager at all to do this. So some of these things that are possible: page views, scrolling on the site, outbound link clicks, site search, video engagement, and also tracking file downloads. So all of these things, you click those on. Google Analytics, these app plus web properties are automatically going to track those for you. There's nothing that needs to be set up in Google Tag Manager for that. This takes, that whole Google Tag Manager step out of it, which is very, very nice. And again, going back to this event-based model. So if you think about, we've talked about this over the last couple slides, but as you think about how you're tracking currently your different properties. So if you have a mobile app and you're using Firebase Analytics, everything is event-based with that. So you're tracking screen views as events, you're tracking any type of engagement, user engagement as events. And then if you want to compare that app with the web version, the website version of that, you have page views, you have events, you have those types of things. So if you're trying to add up the number of events and stuff like that, you don't necessarily have a one-to-one correlation there. Some of those things are going to be a little bit different between that data model. Within this app plus web, everything uses that event-based data model. Everything is an event. So you still have the page view event if you want to. In this case, this is showing you web and an app. You can see we have some events for page view, session start, screen view, so that's within an app, scrolling, clicking, stuff like that. But all of this is multiple platforms that are actually taking place, that are actually sending data into this report. So this is, I believe, iOS, Android app, and then also the website. So this makes it very, very easy to combine all of this data in one kind of view of this data instead of having to rely on multiple different properties, combining that data somewhere else in maybe Data Studio outside or BigQuery. Everything is pulling this data in with those various streams, but it goes into that same Google Analytics property. So it's also possible to send custom data. So for anybody that's on Google Analytics 360 and is using those 200 custom dimensions, 200 custom metrics, content groupings, things like that, a lot of that data can still be sent in, but because this is the Firebase Analytics data model, those things don't exist anymore. So custom dimensions, content groupings, custom metrics, those are no longer a thing with these new App Plus Web properties. Instead, everything gets sent with an event, as we've talked about, but the events can include custom parameters, and you can also send in additional user attributes as user properties. So bottom left-hand corner here, you can see in this example, this is just sending an event for logging in with a custom parameter of the actual login method. And then in the bottom right-hand corner side, we see setting user properties. So what this is doing is setting user attributes. So all of the different hits correspond with this specific user for their favorite composer, instrument, ticket holder, stuff like that. So these are taken from the Google documentation. So if you review those, you'll probably see those in there, but this gives you an idea of how you can actually send in custom data. It's not going to be the same as Universal Analytics with custom dimensions and metrics and content groupings, but you can still collect a lot of that thing. A lot of that information is just going to be sent in a different way. Now, let's go over some of the benefits to tracking apps and web together. So with these new properties, you have this true unified app plus web measurement model. So by using that single data model based on those events and then connecting those different streams, it really allows for that unified tracking across those platforms. So no longer do you have different metrics that you're trying to pull together. You don't have different properties tracking, these different platforms. It's all together, which makes it really easy for that analysis and reporting. We talked about this as well, the automated event measurement. So both apps and web, there are events that are automatically collected that obviously allows for quicker time to insights for you. We talked about the web version of that, which is in the property settings for those new app plus web properties. You can actually go in and click on things like page view, scroll tracking, embedded video tracking, and stuff like that. So that's gets you quickly up and running. Along the same lines for app, if you're using Firebase Analytics, there's a number of automatic events that are collected for those as well. So for things like the first app open, session starts, and other things like that, those are all tracked automatically as well. So from both ends, the app and the web, there's a lot of things that can be tracked automatically without you having to actually do much at all. The last thing here is cross-platform analysis. So if you think about the modern company and the modern company's properties and platforms, obviously there's going to be a lot of those. So really this cross-platform analysis allows for companies to better understand how users are interacting across all these different platforms. Taking one of our news and media clients as an example, so they basically have a subscription site similar to a Netflix for content, and they have a website with a web app where you can actually do it on your desktop. They have a Roku app, they have an Apple TV app, they have apps on, let's see, the PlayStation console, Xbox console, and then they have mobile apps as well, so iOS and Android. And I believe they have Fire TV apps as well. So a ton of different apps out there for this. And so for them, they're wanting to understand, how users are using those different platforms. Do we have users that are, they have 3 different platforms that they regularly watch our content on? How many of those users actually use multiple platforms versus, do all of their watching on one single platform? Allowing companies to understand this makes it crucial for kind of that optimization effort that they're constantly trying to do with their advertising or just with their user experience. So this cross-platform analysis is really made available to companies using these new app plus web properties. I wanted to go over a couple quick examples of the different types of reporting that are now available with app plus web properties. So this is just a high level report, the user's overview report, but I did want to show it is a bit different in terms of the actual layout of the reporting, the different reports that you get access to, and so there is not yet feature parity and won't be for some time with your standard Universal Analytics properties. So I have a slide that actually outlines some of the things that are not currently capable of doing with App Plus Web versus Universal Analytics, but you'll notice that there are far less reports on the left-hand side. And so just keep that in mind. This is still a beta product. It's going to be a beta product for a while. So if you're looking for something like enhanced e-commerce, for instance, enhanced e-commerce is not currently supported with App Plus Web. So there is no possibility of collecting that e-commerce data at this point as you can with Universal Analytics. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to cover with this one. You've noticed some of these types of reports already in Universal Analytics. So you'll see a new section on the bottom left-hand side of the actual interface for analysis. A lot of these reports are still in beta, but these reports are essentially migrated over to these new App Plus Web properties as well. And it really makes these reports super, super functional within these new App Plus Web properties, if you think about it. So because everything is an event, it makes it much easier to do path analysis. You no longer have to use different essentially GA dimensions for this. Everything's an event. There is no, we're going to use the page URL here. We're going to use the app screen name here. Everything is an event. So event name is what you can use in this case. So this path analysis report is just outlining those different events that are actually happening within that user journey, those user interactions. Another thing is funnel analysis reports. So very similarly, you can build funnels based off of these specific events. And so again, you're not having to worry about using multiple combinations of dimensions for things like page URL, screen name, event name, which breaks down to event category, event action, and event label in Universal Analytics. Everything just has an event name, and it makes it much easier for this type of analysis. And then the last one I wanted to go over here was the exploration analysis report. So if you have currently Universal Analytics set up, I would definitely recommend checking out the analysis section. Some of these reports are very, very helpful. It allows you to slice and dice the data a lot quicker than you can within the standard interface using the standard reports or the custom reports. So in this example, this is just showing you it's breaking it down by device category for all the active users on the site. All right, cool. So let's quickly discuss what type of companies could benefit from this. I'm going to go ahead and say short answer, pretty much any, but I wanted to caveat that with some specifics here. So let's talk about media and publishers first. So I outlined the client that we currently work with that has a ton of different essentially platforms that they have, website, over-the-top OTT apps, mobile apps. And so for them, it makes more sense to collect all of that information, all of that data using the same data model rather than using a different data model for apps versus web. Same idea for retail and e-commerce. For a number of retailers at this point, they hopefully have both desktop sites and apps as well. So really allowing those companies to do that cross-platform analysis using the same data model is going to be super, super helpful for them. Consumer packaged goods companies, of course, a lot of these companies and multi-brand companies tend to have a lot of different platforms that they're using, a lot of different microsites, mobile apps, and things like that. This really allows them to take advantage of that as well. And then, of course, I got to put in more because really any company that has a different platforms that they're on, so websites, apps, over-the-top apps, really any of these options, as long as you have apps and web, it's really going to be a benefit for you. So I would suggest definitely checking this out. I wanted to cover a couple examples here really quickly. So we don't work with Netflix, I want to make that clear, but if we use Netflix as an example, I think everyone has hopefully heard of Netflix at this point. We can outline, what they're looking at. So currently they have a website with a web app where you can log in and actually watch content. They have mobile apps, and I might not include all their platforms here. I was doing this off the top of my head. So they have mobile apps, iOS, Android, Fire OS, over-the-top apps on Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, and so on. So for them, what they're tracking are things like app open and session start, views. So that can be page views, that can be screen views, but remember it's all event based. So it's just a view event. Video plays, so video engagement, notification engagement, all these things they want to track really across the board. They want to track the same things across all these different platforms. App Plus Web makes this possible. Let's take a retailer, for example. We'll talk about Macy's here. Hopefully everyone has heard of Macy's before. So they have a website, they have mobile apps, they have different types of tracking that they might set up. And so really in this case, it's very similar. So I think Macy's, I believe they at least have an iOS and Android app. I don't know if they support the tablets or not, but then they of course have the website as well. So for them, using that same data model also will allow them to better analyze and optimize what's going on across those different platforms. All right, so let's talk about double tagging here real quick. Here's the note that I had in here. So I want to make this clear before we go into this. A few things here. So one, App Plus Web properties are in beta, so we've talked about that. And I also mentioned this as well. They do not currently have feature parity with Universal Analytics properties. So some of the things they currently don't support, if you have GA360, there is no service level agreement for these App Plus Web properties. So for the agreements that you have with Google that guarantees things like data freshness, product reliability, and uptime, stuff like that, you do not have that with App Plus Web properties, so keep that in mind. A lot of the GMP integrations, so Display and Video 360, Search Ads 360, Google Ad Manager, any of those integrations, those are not included right now. We talked about enhanced e-commerce and also sending data via measurement protocol. So these are not the end-all be-all list of items that are not yet at parity with Universal Analytics properties, but most of these are pretty much deal breakers for large enterprise companies that are doing like their regular reporting. So for our recommendation, you should not be using App Plus Web properties for like official enterprise analysis and reporting. Really, these are a way to test these new properties to see if they, in fact, would be a good idea to set up in the future. All right, so what is double tagging? I'm making a recommendation that you should deploy these side by side using double tagging. Double tagging simply just means adding dual tracking to your sites and apps. Really, in this scenario that we're talking about here, you would be tracking your platforms with two versions of Google Analytics. So one is your Universal Analytics that hopefully you already have set up and you're doing your regular reporting based off of. And then also adding a new tracker, a new property for your App Plus Web beta property. So this essentially means that each of those platforms are going to send data to two different GA properties. One is your Universal Analytics property for your current data needs, and that should already be set up. And then one is for the new App Plus Web property, and that's really for your kind of testing and evaluation as you move forward. So why would you want to deploy both? Again, I want to make it clear it is not a requirement. We're not saying go ahead and start doing this right away. Obviously, you need to talk with your teams, talk through if this might be a good option for you. But really from the Universal Analytics point of view here, it's going to be business as usual. You're going to continue to use those properties for your regular tracking, measurement, reporting, optimization, analysis, all of those things. That's still going to be those Universal Analytics properties that you have set up. For App Plus Web, this gives you a couple different things. So one, you can test out this newest beta version of Google Analytics to see if it simplifies your tracking and analysis. If you try it out quickly and it doesn't work for you at all, it doesn't make any sense, it's not giving you anything extra, then you know right away you don't really need to worry about this at all. You're set with what you have set up. It allows you to simplify your measurement and analysis across the platforms. So we've been talking about that. A lot of new things are possible because you're using that same data model across all of your different platforms. And then also another thing is just gathering historical data for when app and web properties are out of beta. So if you do make a decision at some point that you do want to move over your reporting to the App Plus Web properties, if you set it up now, you have all that historical data in there versus if you wait until they come out of beta and say, okay, yeah, we want to set these up now, you're not going to have that historical data in there. So if anything, you can at least have historical data in there if you do decide to go down that route and use App Plus Web properties for that. So hopefully that was helpful. I want to talk about some next steps here. And again, remind everyone, there's not a ton of information out there on these App Plus web properties right now. You will get a copy of this deck. So these have hyperlinks in there for you to follow. And so if you are interested in reading any of Google's documentations, I have a link there to the blog post and also to their support documents. And then for you internally, really, I would suggest if you at all think that this might be helpful for your organization, go ahead and set it up. Go ahead and try it out. The documentation that I included at the very first bullet point will help you get set up and get started. But you'll need to create a new App Plus web property, deploy that to all of your different platforms, and then you can go ahead and start reviewing the data that you're seeing. So you can always decide to add additional tracking if needed. So if a lot of the automatic tracking that's set up as you create that property, if that's not doing it for you, you can send in additional data. Those documents will help you do that. And then also for new updates that will be coming out and Google will be announcing, definitely follow the official Google Analytics blog. That will cover any new updates, any new features, stuff like that that come out for App Plus web properties. And then also check out our latest webinars. So as new features come out, we will do webinars on them. We will walk you guys through what that means for you as those things come out. So again, not a ton of information out there, not a ton of things to pay attention to, but really any official announcement for these new App Plus web properties, those will be coming from Google. And generally Google does a good job of publishing those on their Google Analytics blog. All right, so let's move over to Q&A. I will see if we had anybody submit questions. Cool, we got a couple good questions here. So one, if I have experience with Google Analytics for Firebase, will App Plus Web be easy for me to pick up? Yeah, for the most part, I think so, yeah. So again, because essentially these new App Plus Web properties are using the Firebase Analytics data model, everything is event-based, it should be very, very easy for you to translate that over to these new App Plus Web properties because everything is the same. So if the data collection model, event-based, you have custom parameters and user properties, all of those things remain the same. So absolutely, if you are currently using Firebase Analytics or Google Analytics for Firebase, they're the same thing. They've changed the name multiple times on us. If you're using that, then yes, you will have a great understanding of it and you'll be ready to go. And then let's see, another question. Are you recommending to your clients they deploy both or only clients in the industries you mentioned? We're really taking it on a case-by-case basis. So for my clients, we will be making that recommendation over the coming months. Kind of depends on where they are with their development cycle and website updates and stuff like that. But ultimately, yeah, we will be making that recommendation over these next few months. For you, if you're not in the news and media industry and you're not in an industry that I mentioned in here, you certainly can still go ahead and deploy those to test it out. So don't let that be a factor in whether you do it or not, just because I mentioned it. So yeah, if you have website, if you have apps, go ahead and test it out. Check it out. And then a follow-up question, does InfoTrust work with any customers in the financial industry? Yeah, so we have I want to say we work with 3 or 4 companies in the financial industry right now. And so yeah, we have a number of large financial institutions that we work with. So yeah. Great question so far. Let me see. We got another question here. Oh, this is a good question. So I understand that with Firebase BigQuery, with Firebase, BigQuery is available for App Plus web properties. Do you feel this will continue post beta? Yeah, absolutely. So Google is all in on BigQuery, Google Cloud, and so there are so many at this point companies that are using integrations with BigQuery, especially with the GA360 integration with BigQuery that. Yeah, absolutely. I think Google will continue to make sure that's a priority with these new App Plus web properties. But yes, good question. Let's see, any other questions? I have one last slide I want to go through, so I'll wait to see if we get any more questions. For anybody that doesn't know, CCPA takes effect January 1st of this next year, which is what, like 4 weeks from now. So it's coming up very quickly. If you in your company still haven't reviewed any information on this, if you guys are still confused, definitely check out our Tag Inspector quick guide to CCPA. It's got a lot of good information in there. You can find it by just going to taginspector.com, or when you get this webinar deck, I have hyperlinks in here for you to review it. So definitely check that out if you guys are going to be affected by CCPA, which really should be pretty much every company. So definitely recommend reviewing that. And then the last slide here, again, if you have additional questions and don't necessarily want to ask them now or haven't thought of them yet, feel free to reach out to me, agibson@infotrust.com. Be glad to chat further on that. So I will see if we get any additional questions here. I'll hang on for a couple minutes, but thank you so much for joining. And also, we sent out a link in the chat panel for that CCPA quick guide. So if you want to just grab that now, go over to that chat panel and click the hyperlink. Thanks so much. I'll hang out for a couple of minutes here, but hopefully this was informative. And if you have any questions, reach out.